Hello students and namaste everyone. I am Dhaval sir and our today's topic is from your standard 8th literature part unit number 10, the Great Stone Face part 2. Okay, so this is a chapter in continuation with part 1. There is the Great Stone Face part 1. Okay, and we had seen in the first part that how Ernest had heard about the prophecy in the valley and how he was eager to see the person who is the likeness of the great stone face. We also see about also saw about the two people named Gathergold and a soldier, okay, who was named as the Blood and Thunder, who came to the valley, and the people they assumed that these two people might be the likeness of the great stone face, but Ernest discovered that there was no likeness or resemblance of these people with the great stone face. Okay, and still he had the hope. Okay, and at the end of the first part we saw that he realized or he felt that the great stone face is looking at him and trying to say that don't get upset. For sure the resemblance, okay, or the person with likeness will be seen by you, okay, or you will get to meet or see the person. Okay, so now in the second part, what is the story? Will Ernest be able to find out who is the likeness or the resemblance of the great stone face, and how? So let us begin with the introduction and summary of this chapter. Okay, so as we have discussed that the writer of this chapter is Nathaniel Hawthorne, okay, and we had seen that Ernest was a very simple and unnoticed boy because he was living a very simple life, so he was not noticed by many people, and he had already grown up to be an old man with white hair. Okay, now in this second part, there is a description about Ernest that he has already grown up from a young person to an old man, and his hairs have turned white. Okay, so all those years uh, from his young age till he had become old had made him wise and knowledgeable. Okay, that a distant men from cities came to visit him, right? So he had become so wise and knowledgeable that people from distant places, they came to this valley to meet Ernest, okay, and take his advice. So why they came? Just to have a conversation with him. Okay, and whenever any people came, he received them with great gentleness and kindness, right? So I always welcome people with kindness, and as he talked to people, his face would brighten and would shine upon others as if he was a mild evening light, right? So whenever any people they came to meet him, when he used to talk with the people, his face would always shine brightly. Okay, the story then introduces us to another son of the valley, right? Two had already come, that is Gathergold and the general of army. Now another son is introduced, okay, who is the son of the valley, who moved to distant cities and pouring them with his sweet music, right? So this son of the valley was living at a distant city away from the original valley, and he was giving the people great music, and he kept the great stone face alive in his poems. Okay, so Ernest once came to know about him, and as he read the poet's thought in his book, right, Ernest read the poems which were written by the poet who belonged to this same valley. Okay, and Ernest wished uh, to meet the poet, right? Because he thought that he might be the likeness of the great stone face. Okay, so when the poet came to know, uh, and on the other hand, when the poet whose poems Ernest was reading, that poet, when he came to know about Ernest, okay, he expressed a strong desire to meet him. That means the poet felt that he must meet Ernest. Okay, so thus he comes back to the valley, okay, and asks Ernest to give him a night's shelter. Okay, so the poet comes to the Ernest's house or home and he asks for a night's shelter. Okay, and they talked to each other, and never before had the poet talked with a man like Ernest. That means uh, before that, the poet had met many people, but when he met Ernest, he found that Ernest was a totally different person. He had never met any kind of person or any person like Ernest. Okay, because Ernest was so wise and gentle and kind. Okay, and on the other hand, Ernest was moved by, or he strongly got affected by the living images which came out of the poet's mind. Right, when he talked with the poet, he felt very much impressed by the poet. Okay, and when upon being asked, means when he asked the poet told him that he was the writer of the book Ernest was reading. Okay, so as soon as he heard this, Ernest compared the poet's features with that of the great stone face. Okay, and when they did not match, he became sad. Right, so Ernest again had a thoughts in his mind that it might be possible that this poet could be the resemblance of the great stone face. But when he compared the features, there was no resemblance or no likeness of the poet with the great stone face. Okay, so further, uh, when he asked the poet, so when the poet asked him that why you are sad, right? So at that time, Ernest told him that when he read his book, he thought him to be the man that would fulfill the prophecy. Okay, but he was very disappointed when he found out that he was not the resemblance of the great stone face, and the poet considered himself unworthy of bearing the resemblance to the great stone face, as he knew that although his thoughts were great and he had great dreams, but those had just remained dreams, and he himself lacked faith in his thoughts. That means he was himself lacking faith in his thoughts, and he had seen great dreams, but he could never fulfill them. Right, so the poet himself never considered himself to be the resemblance of the great stone face. Okay, so it was a practice for Ernest to speak to his neighbors every evening. Right, it was a ritual for Ernest to speak to his neighbors every evening at sunset in the open air. Okay, and both men went to the meeting place. That means the poet as well as Ernest went to the meeting place from where the great stone face was clearly visible. And as Ernest began speaking, he shared whatever he had in his mind and heart. Okay, so his thoughts were so powerful since they were supported by a life full of good deeds. That means his thoughts were very powerful. Whose thoughts? That is earnest thought, because throughout his life he had lived a very simple life. Okay, and he had always been been helpful to the other people. Right, so his life was full of good deeds. Okay, and those were not mere thoughts. That means the things what Ernest spoke or told, he actually practiced. Right, he not only gave the thoughts to the people, right, but he actually practiced the things of helping the others. So those thoughts were actually not merely thoughts but the words of life, right, what Ernest spoke. And the poet, as he listened to Ernest, he felt that the life and character of Ernest were a nobler form of poetry than he had ever written. Okay, and his eyes were filled with tears as he realized never had he seen a man so kind and gentle, sweet and wise as Ernest. Right? So the poet was very happy to see Ernest. Okay, and suddenly he noticed the great stone face with the golden light of the setting sun. That means the sun was setting. Okay, and in that golden light he saw at the great stone face. Okay, upon it, and the mist around him. Mist means the fog. Okay, and he noticed that it resembled the eyebrows of Ernest. Right, the great stone face eyebrow resembled the eyebrows of Ernest. And when the poet compared Ernest's grand expression to the great stone face, okay, he couldn't help but tell everyone that Ernest himself was having the likeness of the great stone face. And at that time, everyone in the valley agreed to that. And Ernest, however, still hoped for a man better and wiser than himself to come, bearing resemblance to the great stone face. So this was the story about Ernest. Okay, and our part 2 chapter. Right, so the people in that valley had already agreed that Ernest is the likeness or resemblance of the great stone face. But as Ernest was so wise and gentle, right, and so down to earth, that he was still waiting for a better person who could be the resemblance of the great stone face. So that's it about your unit number 10, the great stone face part 2. Okay. The detailed explanation of this chapter will be done in the next lecture. Okay, so I'll end this lecture over here, and I thank you everyone for watching my video.